Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Future of Jewish podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Hoffman. On this episode, I am joined by Dina Rabhan. She is a strategy and creative consultant with more than 25 years of diverse career experience and expertise in media, education, nonprofits, leadership, and mental health. She works with small and medium-sized enterprises in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors, currently sits on the board of 2 startups, and is an executive producer for a new documentary film called Uncharitable. Enjoy my conversation with Dina Rabhan. Dina, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today. Before we get into all the great things that you're doing and involved with nowadays, why don't you take us back to sort of the beginnings and everything that led to where you are today?
Something that I learned when I was getting my master's in social work was creating a timeline of your life, and putting, nodules or like points at the parts that were most significant or meaningful. Because how do you talk about your life when there's so much to say without boring the audience and going into too much detail? So I actually drew a little timeline. But to preface a little bit about how I am where I am today, I do want to say that something that I think about, but I'm happy to articulate, is that I had a pretty unremarkable childhood, as things go. But I was incredibly fortunate, really won the lottery, privileged to have been surrounded by incredible human beings from the beginning. And they really set the tone and path for my life. People who exemplified love, empathy, pursuit of justice, responsibility, community, lifelong learning and curiosity, humility, and true lives of service to others. And so while there isn't much to talk about in my early years, because I was surrounded by people who loved me and gave me everything that I needed in a wonderful environment, reflecting on it now, I'm really lucky for the people who were my role models. And I think that not only has it set me on my path and to where I am today, but the values continue to inform the people that I choose to work with and be around moving forward. So, anybody out there who might be from Fair Lawn, New Jersey, or who knows Rabbi Yudin from the modern Orthodox community in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, will understand why I prefaced with what I said. He's just an incredible man, and it was an incredible community, and many Jewish leaders have emerged from that community. And by and large, I think we can attribute it to the fact that not only were our parents incredible people, but we were all being taught by a man who exemplified all the values that I enumerated. So, modern Orthodox typical background, married young. I'm looking at my timeline now. I got married young, and my husband and I set on a path for Jewish communal building, Jewish education, and we landed very quickly in Palm Springs, California, where I tell everyone that even though we were only there for 2 years, it was like dog years, because so much happened in those 2 years, and so many life lessons and so many incredible friendships were made. And for the next many years, we really followed the path of a joint commitment to community. He was a community rabbi. And so we went from Palm Springs, did a little bit in New York, a little longer in New Jersey, and we ended up in Long Island for close to a decade with my incredible Persian friends. And then 7 years ago this August, we landed in Israel, which is probably the craziest midlife adventure that I ever or never expected to take.
Amazing. And so, you get to Israel, and I know, you had some time with a few organizations. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the organizational work that you've done since living in Israel?
Sure. So I've had a pretty zigzaggy career, if you're familiar with that term. I am a proud generalist And because I was surrounded by adults who were like incredibly curious and lifelong learners, I didn't even understand how that like seeped into my bones. And because of that, I've had a really interesting and pretty diverse journey that continues to this day. And it's, reveals itself as I continue on this journey. So prior to coming to Israel, I was really fortunate to have worked at Yeshiva University as an educational consultant, working primarily with North American Jewish day schools, focusing on teaching, learning, and leadership, really building out an educational consulting office. And I took that job with me. It actually allowed me to make Aliyah with the security that I had something in place when we landed here, as opposed to my husband, who made a decision for an entire career pivot. So I was very fortunate. And when I came to Israel, shortly after, about a year after being here, I was offered a position at what was then Jerusalem U, what then became Open Door Media, which I thought I was pursuing something that was related to the field of Jewish education. And what ended up happening was that I had the opportunity to build a modern media company, which became Open Door Media, and the whole world of media opened up to me, which was incredible and exciting and so much to learn. So when you look back at where I came from, I started in Jewish education and community work and community building. I got a degree in social work. I ended up as an educational consultant, and then suddenly I was the CEO of a small nonprofit modern media company. And it was something that if someone said to me, "Oh, do you have training in media? Did you take courses in media?" And I had to explain, I had to teach everything to myself and surround myself with people who knew more than I did. And it really, in many ways, opened up a whole new world of possibilities for me. And it also showed me in no uncertain terms how powerful media can be if it's leveraged for good. And to me, that animates so much of who I am, what I believe, and the things that I pursue now, because I'm just amazed. In fact, I saw the other night the film Hustle with Adam Sandler. I don't know if you had a chance to see it yet. Did you?
No, I haven't, but I heard it's good.
It was good. It was like perfect for a Netflix film. Now like we distinguish between something that's worthy of theaters, like Top Gun was really worth a theater, and versus something like this, which felt right watching it on Netflix. And I asked my dad, I said, "Daddy, what do you think was the most exciting and meaningful moment of that film for me?" And he wasn't sure. And I told him, there's a part in the film where Adam Sandler, who's a recruiter for the NBA, he finds this like incredible talent, but he is unsuccessful getting him the opportunity to really be shown and to participate in the combine, I think it's called. And he really hits a wall from it, great personal expense. And it was really sad. And he's sitting at the table with his wife and his daughter, who's in film school, so she's got to be pretty young, and himself. They're all sitting at the table, and he's hit a wall like, I don't know what I'm going to do. This guy's going to have to go back to Spain, this talent that he had picked. And his daughter said, well, why don't we figure out how to do this ourselves? And she basically figured out how to collab with Dr. J, right? So like with a major basketball icon and influencer, and they just broke through using their own content, creating their own content and creating what was really a viral moment. And it really probably other people who watched it wouldn't get emotional at something like this, because like, why would you get emotional at watching something go viral like that? And I'm also a media professional, and I know that even using the word viral is kind of like, you're not supposed to use that word because it's unrealistic. But what I really loved about it was the idea that institutions, establishment, infrastructure you don't have to only play by the rules anymore. The power is in the hands of the people. And that's what it demonstrated, is that they couldn't figure out how to get through the door. So they built a new door and they broke through that way. And they did it leveraging social media and content. And it was so inspiring to me. And it really is a lens that I use. And it doesn't matter who I'm consulting with. It informs, even when I'm doing educational consulting or I'm doing business consulting, really being able to think about how can we take some of the power, figure out how to leverage the existing tools and the knowledge that's out there, and to solve problems that in the past we might needed, like a super expert, or we wouldn't have access to have been able to have solved those problems. So it's a really exciting time, and I love what I'm doing.
Yeah, you can definitely hear that in your voice. I'm curious to know, because I see a lot of your posts and content on LinkedIn about transformation that you'd like to see in the nonprofit world specifically. And I'm just curious, for people that are listening to this that work in the nonprofit world, or even in the for-profit space, and are searching for those opportunities to break down those new doors or to stand up new doors altogether. In your experience, what are some of the things that have been successful in helping you do that type of thing, and some of the things that you're also working on today that maybe you can shed some light on in that regard?
Wow, that's like a really complicated question. It's like triple, quadruple barreled. So I'll have to pick my point of entry, but then you can redirect me as you'd like. Listen, first of all, anybody who's in the nonprofit sector, my hat's tip to you, kudos. I spent a life in the nonprofit sector. I am the greatest champion, I really am, for the nonprofit sector, and I believe in it with all my heart and soul. And I think that, and by the way, so many of your guests who you've interviewed are incredible nonprofit professionals, so I have the utmost respect for the work that they do. And I think that the opportunities for the nonprofit world are endless now because of what I just described from Adam Sandler's movie, ironically. Like, I really do believe that in many ways, the playing field has been leveled, and access and opportunity that used to really be exclusively for the business sector is opening up for the nonprofit sector. But you and I, Josh, we're friends, and we chat about this whenever we have the opportunity to chat about it. There are the challenges and there are the opportunities. When I left Open Door Media a little over a year ago, I was really, really inspired and motivated to figure out how I could use my emerging expertise and knowledge about media, how I could use that for the and I landed by Dan Pallotta's feet. So anybody who's in the nonprofit sector, if you don't know Dan Pallotta, you should check him out on TED Talks. And if you do know him, then you know that he's a nonprofit icon for the values and ideas that he promoted about 10 years ago on his TED Talk. And when I was looking to find the highest leverage opportunity to advance the nonprofit sector, I just kept messaging him. I like kind of, I don't want to say stalked because that sounds nefarious, but to his credit, he listened and he responded to me and he said, listen, I really like a lot of your ideas that you're describing, and I'm in the process of making a movie with my friend Stephen Gyllenhaal. Why don't I put the two of you in touch and you can talk about it? And what I did was I chose to press pause on some of the ideas that I had about advancing the nonprofit sector in all different ways using media. And I connected with Stephen Gyllenhaal, who's a director in Hollywood. And this was in probably September, so almost close to a year ago. And first he was like, who are you? You're a Jewish woman living in Israel. Like, what's going on? And why am I connected with you? But to his credit also, he was very open and listened. And together we said, all right, let's partner and help bring this documentary called Uncharitable. Let's help bring it to the world and really try to make a difference by pushing the nonprofit sector forward. And what it really does is it asks everybody to radically rethink charity and the nonprofit sector. That's the nonprofit sector can use it as a tool, but they know everything that's in the movie. They're just going to be like, yeah, amen, absolutely. They'll watch it and feel incredibly validated. It's the rest of the world that we're hoping this film will get in front of and give not just philanthropists or emerging philanthropists, everyday people who are not involved in the nonprofit sector. It will hopefully help change their perspective and understand that we have all the money, all the smarts, all the resources, all the abilities that we need to fix all the problems. We do. It's all there. It's just a matter of how we utilize, execute, leverage. And the idea is that for the gap that government and business can't address, the nonprofit sector needs to exist, and the world needs to invest in the work that the nonprofits are doing boldly and with commitment to innovation and patience, the way that the world invests in the business sector, understanding that sometimes profit and results might take 5 to 10 years before you really see it, but they keep pouring money because they know the outcomes will be there. Similarly, the message of the movie is, listen, nonprofits can't be existentially challenged and be hustling every year to be able to survive financially. And they can't be constrained in the kind of talent that they need to hire to be able to solve like some really serious problems. We're just not going to be able to do the work if we can't think about it differently. I mean, in addition to Dan Pallotta, Scott Harrison from Charity Water is a role model of mine. I was just listening to a podcast that he did this week, and we have him in our film. And I don't want to give too many spoilers, but one of my favorite parts of the film is when Scott says, we know what we're doing and we can do it. We just have to go faster. And the way for us to be able to go faster is that we need people to be able to give us the money to build what we know already works and to do it even faster. And I believe that the message of the movie will, whether people agree with it or not, because I know, Josh, I want you to see it and then we'll have the debate whether you agree with it or not. I know that it'll get the conversations going and hopefully help everybody reconsider whatever assumptions and beliefs that they have for the good of us all.
So, I think on a macro level, right? Like I probably would agree with the premise of the film. You told me a little bit about it privately, but if we're looking at it through the lens of the Jewish world, which we know is predominantly nonprofit, I think one of the things that like like there's plenty of money in the Jewish nonprofit world. Like, the issue with certain organizations not being able to get their hands on a certain amount of dollars or shekels or whatever is in some cases due to a variety of different circumstances. And in many cases, it's due to the fact that there's just a lot of overlap and like a lot of redundancy. And so I'm just curious, like, when you look at the film and the messages that it portrays, and then you put those through the prism of the Jewish world, is it something that you feel the Jewish world can really latch onto? Or do you feel that maybe the Jewish world, part of the issue is that there's too many nonprofits and that maybe we need to have a little bit more for-profit presence to balance out the predominance of nonprofits?
You will never get me to say anything negative about my community recorded. I actually believe the same thing, that the Jewish community has all of the necessary smarts, talent, and resource to address all of the challenges that we uniquely face as a community, whatever those challenges might be. And I do believe that to be able to do that, it will require quite a bit of innovative and what I call divergent thinking. My concern with any group, right, is that people tend to start experiencing groupthink, and it's hard to actually break out of that. I am a huge fan of David Epstein's book, Range, like huge. It basically validated my life. Anybody wants to understand me, if anybody was interested in understanding generalists in general, his book Range was fantastic. And in it, he talks about something called, it's a German word, the Einstellung effect. Yeah, it's a psychological term that for the tendency of problem solvers to employ only familiar methods, even though that there are better ones available. But when you start to get specialized or too specialized, it's actually really hard to think outside the box, even though that's kind of a hackneyed word. It's actually true. It's psychologically true. And I think that the Jewish community, whether or not we need to consolidate nonprofits because more keep popping up, that's kind of not the issue that I see. It's not a matter like, are there too many? Should they be for profit? Should they be, monetized, whatever it is? I think in general, how we approach problem solving in the Jewish community needs to be really cracked open wide, and not with like another think tank, and not with more of the same characters, usual suspects. I think that what the community would really benefit from is a divergent thinking, open-mindedness, and really looking outside of the community for wisdom and ideas and innovations that can do what needs to happen. And I know people will hear this and they'll say, we are doing that. So many people are doing it. Yes. And like Scott Harrison says in our film, we have to do it better and faster. So I'm not negating the people who are way smarter than me and who've been doing this way longer than me. I'm just recommending that we push for cracking open who's invited around the table, really pushing ourselves to think differently and believing that we can solve these problems. When Scott Harrison says he says 10% of the world is drinking dirty water, and his goal is to solve it. And in our film, Dan Pallotta says, our goal is to end world hunger, and people are actually trying to do that. It's so massive, and I believe it is possible. And I believe the same is true with the Jewish community. We just have to keep trying different things and bringing in new people who can help us think in ways that we might not have considered before.
So in theory, that all sounds great, but in practicality, how do you apply that?
Oh, practicality. It's a really good question. I think it's actually, there's some really practical applications, and that's looking at who's around the table, bringing in outside consultants, even the work that I do with helping organizations redefine their strategy and really optimize their people and processes. It's incredible what happens when somebody who is not from within, right? Like an outsider comes in and is able to take an honest look at what's going on and who's making it happen. Things really shift. And so that's on a micro level, right? My work with companies and nonprofits, that's like a micro example, but I believe that on a communal example, get different minds around the table and approach it with the flexibility, right? That's the other necessary ingredient. It's approaching it not being brittle, but being really open and flexible to considering that maybe how we've been doing it is actually totally wrong, or maybe how we were doing it was totally right, but now it's 2022 and we're in the knowledge economy, creator economy, TikTok generation. There is so much, the rate of change is so fast that if organizations, any organization and any company, frankly, if they're not reflecting and looking and learning and trying to figure out how they can adapt and apply what is going on and the new information and the new opportunities, you're behind before you even realize you're behind. It happens so quickly. And so I really think that very, very tachlis, right? Practical applications are approach things with a flexibility despite the feelings of defensiveness that people naturally have when somebody comes in from the outside and says, hey, I think you should do it. Let's turn this on its head. And you've invested your whole life and everything you believe, your whole construct and your mental models are all based on certain beliefs. And someone comes in and says, we're going to throw those out. Obviously, hopefully it's all done with the respect it deserves. But the people around the table have to have the flexibility and the openness and to bring those people there to hear it from the outsiders. And I think that can happen. Every single Jewish nonprofit can do that. Every single Jewish nonprofit can do that.
So it's interesting what you said, because once upon a time, I thought that what you were saying was possible and plausible. But what I've since learned in conversations like these and private conversations is that maybe the best way to do what you're talking about is not to go into existing organizations and try to quote unquote change them, but just to start new ones that don't have the baggage and the mental models and the different things that hold people back from ultimately making progress. And to that you say what?
Well, I mean, it's like both of us are Israeli, Josh, and so we understand bureaucracy, right? Because we live in Israel. And so we understand how when things have been long established and there are systems in place, how change can be at a infinitesimal or at such a snail's pace that you just want to break the system and start fresh. So I think it's a debate. I don't think that there's a one right answer. And I think it really depends on the service and the problem that's being solved. So I think that it could be that organizations that are helping to the indigent, they're helping with poverty issues, homelessness, food scarcity, food insecurity. It could be that if they've been doing it for decades, that they have incredible institutional knowledge and communal knowledge, that a rejiggering of their system actually is the right approach because they just have way too much expertise and knowledge to throw it out and start from scratch, and trust, right? Communal trust. But I'm an educator, so I will be recorded in saying that I do believe that the education system, formal and experiential, would benefit from a complete redo. Just start from scratch. And I'm not unique in saying this. I follow, I have many educational gurus that I follow and that I learn from and I read, and I'm sitting at their feet and they say the same thing. I mean, the industrial model of education, it's like the most backward system. And so I think that when you're talking about any kind of education, and particularly Jewish education, that there are likely many opportunities for a total reboot. Or I don't know if reboot's the right word, just starting from scratch, because you can't fix what is so entirely broken and ineffective and like just not speaking to the people that you're trying to reach. So, I think it goes both ways.
One of the things that's interesting to me, you were the CEO of a Jewish nonprofit, and I've been very outspoken that we don't have any leaders in the Jewish world today. Probably the last great leader was Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who of course passed away. Even then, I would argue that he wasn't at the level that I think we need somebody to be in the Jewish world, or multiple people. And I've basically said that, listen, we can all name the CEOs of some of the biggest brands and companies around the world. And yet when it comes to the Jewish world, we can't name a single one in most cases. You, as a former CEO of a Jewish organization, I'm just curious, is there any thinking on your part during that time of you saying, I need to be the face of this organization, or I need to be, a quote unquote Jewish leader, or were you more just operational? I mean, how do you hear my criticism of the lack of Jewish leadership coming from a place of a high rank?
I'm not sure it was such a high rank, but I appreciate the question. I think that I have a very personal take on that question, and then more of a communal take on it. And my personal perspective is that, like many people, I suffer from imposter syndrome, and very convenient as a media professional. I was very comfortable putting everybody else in front of the camera except for myself. In fact, Josh, this is the first podcast I have ever done, despite having been asked many, many times to do it. And that's my own stuff. I have incredible respect for the wisdom that others have to share. And so I defaulted to putting other people out there, believing that they would offer greater value and greater returns. I think that, and therefore, while I was in a leadership position, I really didn't think as much about what you're describing, which is that, wow, it would be actually really important and valuable for the Jewish community to see a Jewish woman as the CEO of a modern media company. Like, it had all the ingredients for something that would be meaningful, both in the Jewish community and I think outside, for people who are looking into the Jewish community. And I wasn't really thinking about that. And if I did, I focused a bit more on building my personal brand, and felt again like I had imposter syndrome, and so didn't feel confident enough. And that's changing, by the way, because and TikTok has actually really helped me with that, which people might think is weird. I'm a huge TikTok fan, and I see how everyday, ordinary human beings make me laugh and cry and teach me. And it highlights something that I learned from a rabbi who I admire and I'm actually working with, Rabbi Scott Kahn. He quoted Henri Nouwen, who is a Catholic, he was a Catholic priest, who said that the universal is particular, that the communal is very personal. And so, you recognize that what regular people are going through can be super meaningful for regular people, and that the idea that you have to be in a position of power or something notable to be able to give value to our world has really changed for me, most dramatically because of TikTok and the way that its platform works. So huge shout out for TikTok. And back to your original question, in terms of why don't we have more leaders that people know by name? I think that we actually do. I just think that their circles of influence are too small because they have not yet understood or figured out how to leverage media in a way to expand their circles of influence and people recognizing who they are. I really think that once upon a time, it was much harder to be able to be a CEO in a small niche community that the niche community would know you and know what you're doing. Now it's not hard. And I think that hopefully people who are sitting in positions of power and influence will recognize the opportunity to share more, lead more, and to really leverage what the capabilities that are out there to be able to do it. I don't want to make it sound like I think that there's something wrong with anybody. I just think that CEOs tend to be really, really busy. And when you're not part of like a FANG company, like you don't have billions of dollars of advertising behind you to make sure that everybody knows who you are and you have the opportunity to really self-brand and brand your company. I think that when you're working in the Jewish community and there's such a hustle and sacrifice to be able to do that, often the last thing people are thinking about is like, how can I expand my circles of influence? Because they're just busy doing their thing. And hopefully we'll see more of that.
Yeah, but couldn't you make the argument that if you and your organization are doing quote unquote innovative things, that then you'll just get organic press and organic attention that would then lead to the sort of personal brand building that you're talking about? Because of course, it's one thing to artificially inflate your personal brand. It's another thing to just go out and do such great work that in today's day and age will get noticed. And especially in the digital age and social media and TikTok, as you mentioned, among other platforms, to me, like maybe that's what's missing. Like if people were doing more innovative work, and I always am very clear about my definition of innovative, right? Because people have different definitions, and I think it's always important to be on the same page with people about how you define certain things. Because what you might consider innovative is different than what I do. For me, it's very clear. One, scale, and in really today's day and age, if not international, multinational, global scale, widespread consumer adoption. So hitting a healthy, percentage of your total addressable market. And the third thing is repeat engagement. I think this is where like Birthright really misses the mark, where Birthright has the scale and has what we can call widespread consumer adoption for its total addressable market, but doesn't have the repeat engagement. Therefore, I don't consider Birthright, according to my definition of innovative, to be innovative because it doesn't check all three of those boxes. So I guess what I'm just saying is like, ultimately for people to know who you are, not just as a person, but as your organization as well, like you have to really be making noise, and making noise today means being innovative. And I don't see really any level of innovation according to that definition to suggest that people would want to pay attention to the people that run these organizations.
Whew. Them be fighting words. Okay, so I'm gonna respond to a couple of things. First of all, in Birthright's defense, I think that they've got the scale, they've got the TAM in terms of like the LTV, right? Like the lifetime value. They could argue that, like dating apps, they have a limited LTV, which is just for a certain amount of time. And they actually, I think that part of their mission and platform or whatever it is that they do what they do, that is what they do, and then other communal infrastructure is supposed to pick up after that incredible experience that they offer. So we don't need to go down the Birthright road, because I honestly, I don't know enough about the internal mechanisms of what they're doing. I just see what I see, and but I would be careful that we are, according to your three standards, that you remember that not all innovation is supposed to have an LTV of like extended period of time necessarily. I think that, I'm a big fan of Harry Stebbings' 20 VC. And part of my generalist position is that I learn from a very broad spectrum of sectors and people. And Harry has 20 VC is his brand. I was introduced through his podcast, and he is regularly interviewing all types of people, whether they're have venture firms or whether they have SaaS products that they've exited or they're working on or whatever it is. But what has been astonishing to me is how many people are really under the radar, and they're doing they have billion-dollar valuations or whatever it is, but we don't know really about their product. We don't really know about, maybe it's a Chrome extension, and so we'll have it and we'll know, but we don't really know who the CEO is or how it's being built. So I would push back and say that I think that there's so much innovation happening in the world. I'm putting aside the Jewish community right now. There's just tons of innovation. And every time I listen to different interviews and I'm like, oh my God, what is that product? That's an incredible product. I never even heard of that product. Or I use that product, but who knew that this was the brilliant mind behind it? So I think that just because you're doing something brilliant and important does not mean that you are necessarily known for it. Okay? Now, in the Jewish community, I think that, again, kind of similar to what I said earlier, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to innovate in the ways that you're describing so that there will be scale, so that there will be, getting to the total available addressable markets, so that there will be repeat engagements. I think that there's huge opportunity for it. I think that people are trying, they're really trying. And I think back to what I said earlier, they've got to open the discussion. They've got to bring more people around the table. They have to, because it's not fast enough. It's just not. And I don't mean this as a criticism. I mean this as a community member who's passionate about advancing who we are as a people, and someone who respects and admires the hard work that hundreds and thousands of people have committed and sacrificed their lives to. And there's more opportunity that is untapped. And people need to they need to get to their offices knowing that. And they need to do everything they can to discover those opportunities. They need to be relentless in searching for wisdom that nobody on their team has, and perspectives that they might not have considered, because when people become specialized, right? Like I said earlier, you become specialized, and there's so much value in the specialization of whatever it is you're doing. But by specializing, you're actually canceling out all these opportunities to think really differently and to innovate like you're describing. So I think, listen, I'm really an optimist. I believe that there is endless opportunities for everybody to be doing everything better, and that everybody has to have that stance. They need to have that stance and not be afraid of it. And I think that that's what trips us up, is that people are having lots of conversations with the usual suspects, and so they're not providing opportunity for the much broader range of expertise that could be brought into their thinking. And I think that human beings are human beings, and we fear change. And even when we say in the most sincere way, we want change. I want to do this better. I want this to be better. I want to solve this problem. You can't just override our human tendency, which is, I will do everything to stop that change from happening. And I think that if we can have these conversations and have people recognize that we're not bringing in the right people, and perhaps we're being resistant to some of the innovations that could be possible because we're scared of change and what that might mean and what that might look like, I think that things could be really spectacular and fit all three of your categories. And then have leaders and CEOs and professionals who are able to be more widely known and recognized, because the work will be so undeniably fabulous and impactful that the community won't be able to contain it. It'll just, we'll all know about it because it'll be something so spectacular.
I'm writing an essay right now called How Jews Change and the 5 Ways We Don't. And one of the 5 ways we don't is Jewish genius, which there was a great article that I found written by the aforementioned Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And he talked about one of his 7 criteria for one of the reasons for Jewish genius is that Jews have tended to prefer the power of ideas rather than the idea of power. And so I'm just curious, that's another way of saying meritocracy over bureaucracy or autocracy. And so I'm just curious, in your experiences going back to running organizations, it's got to be hard understanding that you have a very non-flexible budget and sort of annual plans and programs versus when maybe a young, or I shouldn't say young, but an ambitious person, young or old, comes to you either from the inside in the organization or somebody from the outside saying, hey, I think, you should try doing this, or here's another idea, or here's how we can improve X, Y, and Z. How did you balance that sort of bureaucracy and autocracy with meritocracy And what are some of the things that maybe you can share with us about how organizations can better do that? Because I think that's also a big issue when it comes to, transformation and innovation is sort of the lack of meritocracy that I find exists in many organizations.
Wow, your questions are super complex and weighty. Like we could spend the whole time just talking about this. I do want to first say you are a content beast. And for people who don't know, that is a compliment because you are incredible at your pace of creating and publishing and distributing content. And I have so much respect for you. And I tell everybody that I'm amazed because you are just out there. And I am 100% there for it. So I love that you're just sending essays and podcasts and everything that you're doing. Forget about the businesses you're building, which is incredible. The question that you asked, Josh, is really all about organizational change, right? I mean, that is what I think that's at the heart of what you're asking, of which I have a certain level of expertise, but only because I have had the opportunity to learn with organizational change experts at Harvard and have read extensively about it, really starting, I would say, probably in my social work education. But then when I moved into the education sector, obviously that's such a huge piece of the consulting work that we had to do, which is how do you take institutions that have been around for a century and schools which are complex systems and help people adapt and adopt change. And it's like gets down to the most, listen, we're not going to do a whole session on like what does organizational change look like and what are all the things that it requires. It's pretty complex and it's totally doable. It is doable. However, I think that what you'll find in any of the literature and anybody who does this work professionally, who has expertise in it, is that the humanity of it is so critical. That we can come in with the best ideas, really like the sickest, most incredible ideas that can change the community, that can change the world. And if it's not brought to whoever it needs to be brought to in a way that is palatable and respects the human condition and our resistance to change, as you know, like you just won't get anywhere. And so I think that if people are looking to make serious changes, or if people are frustrated that they can't make the changes that they want, that they take the time to really learn and understand the important human elements that need to be addressed when discussing issues of change, which is really at the end of the day, it's the fear, but there are so many fears attached to it. Fear of becoming irrelevant, fear of losing my job, fear of the unknown and unfamiliar, fear that I'm old and I can't keep up with this pace. I mean, the fears are, there's a myriad of fears, and in every situation and every scenario, that needs to be predicted and then addressed in the design of the intervention. And when it's not, and by the way, I'm talking from experience, like having done it wrong, obviously, right? Like I'm not talking from experience. I mean, sometimes right and sometimes wrong. Like you really learn the hard way, and it's pretty discouraging. And I think that the Jewish community needs to recognize that change is hard, and we need to get smarter in how to implement and adopt change. And of course, again, just remembering the humanity of it, because the more that we can cultivate our empathy and how we approach the human beings that are being asked to make change. But by the way, whether it's the professionals or the donors, like it doesn't matter which board members, doesn't really matter which role you're playing. Human beings are human beings, and we need to be really, really empathetic and intelligent about how we go about it. But I think it's, again, like I feel like I keep repeating it. I'm optimistic. I think it's possible. We've seen it done. It can happen. And it's a matter of committing to believing that it's possible. And if you believe it, then there'll be routes to figure out how to make it happen.
Dina, this has been a really pleasurable and insightful episode. Thank you so much for your time.
I loved speaking with you. Thank you for giving me my first podcast platform opportunity. And I look forward to continuing to read and engage with all of what you produce moving forward. You are a role model for the opportunities that we all have to share our experiences and wisdom with our community and the world. So thank you.